Brothers and sisters, turn with me to Ezekiel chapter 8. We're going to look a little bit at Israel, and we'll pick it up in verse 5, Ezekiel 8:5. Then said he unto me, Son of man, lift up thine eyes now the way toward the north. So I lifted up my eyes the way toward the north, and behold, northward at the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy in the entry. Right there at the entrance of the gate was an image set up. Why would it be called an image of jealousy? What do you think would bring that name? It must have been a false idol. A false idol that would make God jealous, because this is His place, this is His city, this is His sanctuary, and God did not want Israel to worship any false idols. He said therefore furthermore unto me, Son of man, seest thou what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary, but turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations. And because of this image of jealousy, God turned His back on Israel. He had to go far away from His sanctuary. He would not allow His Spirit to dwell with Israel. And this is a time of departing from the people of Israel, from His chosen people, where God leaves them. He talks about in verse 7 about paintings on the wall. Verse 7, verse 8, and then verse 9 he says, Go in and behold the wicked abominations that they do here. So I went in and saw, and behold every form of creeping things and abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about. So we see Israel's got idols all around the temple, of creeping things, different types of animals, and so on. And these were unclean. Unclean before the Lord. And there stood before them 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel, and in the midst of them stood Jezaniah the son of Shaphan, and every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. Then said he unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the chamber of his imagery? For they say, The Lord seeth us not, the Lord hath forsaken the earth. And then he talks about greater abominations in verse 13. And in verse 14, he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. So these women were weeping for this pagan god, a Babylonian god, Tammuz, who had died, and they were weeping over the death of this god as part of their practice. This was a ritual of weeping for Tammuz. And of course, later they would celebrate because Tammuz would come to life later. And reading on, we see even sun worship in Israel. He speaks in verse 15 of even greater abominations. And 16 he says, He brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. That really provoked the Lord. Imagine, instead of worshiping God, Israel worshiping the sun, worshiping Tammuz, and worshiping all these images of idols painted on the walls, and this image of jealousy set up at the gate. Verse 17, reading down into it, Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger, and lo, they put the branch to their nose. Therefore will I also deal in fury. My eyes shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they Cry in mine ears with a loud voice will I not hear them. And what had occurred is Israel, who had always been the people of God, who known God as their God, the one true living God, the Creator, had brought in all these various systems of false worship. And the question would be, where did they get all this false worship from? Was this something from their own nation? No. Israel learned all these practices from the nations around them, from the people around them. They learned to set up idols like the heathen around them. And they learned to set up images of jealousy and do the paintings. And of course, Tammuz was not an Israelite god. It was a Babylonian god. And they took on these practices. And of course, the practice of worshiping the sun like they did in Egypt, where they worshiped the sun and called it the eye of Horus, and worshiped the Pharaoh as the incarnation of the sun on the earth. And in fact, all nations have worshipped the sun, except Israel was supposed to be separated and apart from that. Well, in Ezekiel chapter 33 and verse 6, God had set a watchman over Israel. He told Ezekiel he was a watchman. And that Ezekiel's purpose was to sound the trumpet. A watchman would sit in a tower and look over the plain towards the mountains, and if ever there was an approaching army, ever approaching desolation or destruction, the watchman was to sound the trumpet so the city would be alerted and the call to battle would go out and lives would be spared. However, in the case of Ezekiel, he was to call out to Israel all the iniquity before God to spare their lives so that they would not perish. Because what comes with abomination is desolation. God would judge any that practice abomination before Him. And not only judge, but basically purge away. Now Israel had known for the longest time only to worship the one true living God. The Ten Commandments were given to Israel. And in Exodus chapter 20 and verses 3, 4, and 5, we were not to put any gods before our God, and not to make idols or images in the likeness of things on this earth and then bow down and worship them. So Israel knew.